I'm Dr Amandeep Hansra. I'm a GP in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, but I also spend a lot of my time working in the digital health space as a consultant, and I've spent many years working in telehealth. It's exciting to see everybody taking it up now. And I ended up working for Telstra, and then they were setting up a telehealth business as well there. And then I've worked in other areas in the Philippines and other international companies in telehealth. Look, I think we rapidly had to change how we delivered care when COVID came. We didn't necessarily have the video platforms ready, we didn't have our workflows ready, our practice staff weren't prepared, and our patients weren't prepared, and we weren't prepared. So even for me, where I do telehealth in another role, bringing it into my practice setting itself was still a challenge. I think sometimes it's fear of the unknown. I think it's until you do the first one, you're going to be afraid that it's going to be complex. And I actually found the first time I did it with the way my practice set it up, it was literally, here is a link in my booking schedule, and I just hit the link. The link opened up the video platform, and I just hit something that said ping the patient, tell them I'm ready, and it pinged the patient. The patient got a notification on their phone, oh, the doctor's ready. Click the link and they were in, I was in. If the patient has stepped away, there are platforms that have an ability to alert the patient that I'm now ready, come back, or might be able to alert the patient if there's a delay. I had no issues with doing it. I actually found it harder to find the patient's mobile number and go over to my phone and put it in and make sure I got the right number, versus just clicking a link on my computer, which I already was on. So we're already interacting with our computer, whereas then sort of bringing the phone into it was another aspect for me to have to consider. And obviously then you have to make sure your number, if you're using your mobile, isn't visible to the patient. Whereas here, this link system made it very easy to know that my privacy was protected as well. I think it's a matter of every practice is going to have different workflows and they're going to have different platforms they've chosen. But for the GPs to give feedback to the practice managers and whoever's setting it up to say, I want it so simple that I can hit a link and I get into where I need to get in. Most practices will have online bookings, and it would be good if a practice can enable a patient to book a telehealth appointment online. And if they can book it online, then you can see it appear in your appointment bookings list as a patient has booked a telehealth appointment. It's actually quite rare nowadays to have to download lots of plugins and things for video conferencing platforms. Yes, for some of them like Zoom, you do have to, and you'll find a lot of them have the options where you can join direct from websites rather than from having to download apps. So I think it's important to check what happens on the patient end, because we can sit here and worry about, well, how does it work for us and what do we need to download on our side? But for the patient, they also need to have a really good experience. And I think the worst part is if they have one bad experience, it's really hard to get your patients back on doing telehealth, because they'll say, no, that was awful. I don't want to ever do that again. The video was terrible. I couldn't see them. We kept, breaking up. So now I'm just going to come in face to face. So I think test it out. I think the only issue that I've really had with the videos is obviously just finding space on the screen. So you kind of have the video on one side and you have your patient management system on the other side. So your screen space is a little bit limited, but I've seen other GPs put up 2 screens, and I've got that set up at home so I can have the patient on one screen and on the other have my patient management system, and then I'm fine. So I think, it's really about testing it out. The first time you do it, once you've done it, you go, actually, that wasn't so awful, but it's taken that first step. That's the biggest challenge. And if people want to test it out with even things like Skype or Messenger or things they're used to doing with their family and friends, there's no harm in giving that a go and then getting used to the idea of seeing a patient via video and get a patient experience as well and say, what worked for you better? What was the quality like? What was the actual process of coming into the consult? Did it have a waiting room function? Did it have an ability for us to share other information? I think those sorts of tests are quite okay to do at the moment. So it really depends on, again, what kind of integrations and payment platforms that you have set up. In some situations, you can take credit card details beforehand and then at the end of the consult be able to bill based on the item number that is relevant to that appointment. In others, they might have a pre-booking, but unfortunately then you can't change it at the end. But if you do take their credit card details and then decide at the end how you want to bill them, then the patient will have to go and get their Medicare rebate in a sort of a manual process. But there are systems now that allow for some of that rebate work to occur instantly. But again, it's about looking around at some of the offerings that there are in the market to be able to let that happen seamlessly. It really is, for a good video platform that is integrated with your systems, be as simple as hitting a link. Instead of walking a patient into your room, you're literally hitting that link to be able to have the patient enter your virtual room, and that's as simple as it should be. And I think when the COVID temporary item numbers came out from Medicare, they were very clear in saying that there was no one platform that was mandated, and people could use just freely available platforms like Zoom and Skype and WhatsApp. I think my advice has always been to try and choose health-specific platforms if you can. You know, there are things that we need to think about because we are dealing with private health information. So we're not just doing a work meeting, which Zoom or Skype might be fine for, but we are actually exchanging private information with a patient of ours. So I think there are some standards that are important to be considered when choosing a platform. If we think about general practice at the moment, we try to meet accreditation standards for every other part of how we deliver general practice. And I think definitely technology is another part that has some risks associated with it. There are concerns about where patient information ends up, you know, what can happen if a consult suddenly gets intercepted by somebody, or we lose a connection with someone we're just delivering bad news to, or something like that. So I think we're going to find that as telehealth starts to become more of something that's here to stay, that there are going to be standards that are going to be required to be met. And it may not be that they would mandate that you have to use X or Y platform, but they might say any platform that you use has to meet, at a minimum, these regulations. And I think they've been pretty lax during COVID, you know, rightly so, because we've all had to rapidly offer this service. But I think as we go on, we're going to have to start being very careful about what we are offering to our patients, and that their private health information is secure, and that the patient feels comfortable that it's a platform that meets some kind of standard. The RAC GP has some great resources on their website around how to select a video platform. There are also some resources that have been put out by the Digital Health CRC and also by the Australian Digital Health Agency. So they're sort of considering things like the Australian privacy principles, making sure that data is hosted in Australia, that it's not going offshore, that there is end-to-end encryption of those video consultations, and all those things that need to be taken into consideration when you're choosing a platform. And I think because we had to do it so quickly and rapidly, the department at the time was very open to people using whatever platform was available and whatever patients could access, because it's always important to understand the patient side of it as well, and that it's easy for them and they're comfortable with it. But I think now, as we're starting to embed this a little bit more in what we do, it's probably time to go back and have a look at what platforms are actually ideal if we're going to continue delivering telehealth, that we do have a platform that meets all of those standards. There are a handful now. I mean, there is one that's endorsed by the government and is available for GPs to use, the Healthdirect video call. So that one certainly has met all of those privacy and data hosting standards. But there are a handful of others that have appeared, many of them actually developed by existing vendors who do health technology. So whether it's a company that does your online bookings or whether it's your patient management system. So it's worthwhile having a look at all of those options, because sometimes it's about what is the easiest way to bring it into your existing workflows. And if it's already integrated with another system that you're using, that can be fairly simple to turn on rather than having to engage with a whole new health technology vendor. So those have appeared over the last few months. I think it's worth looking into all of those options. Look, I haven't found an independent analysis. I think a lot of the existing companies will put up comparisons of their product with others, but they're starting to become some better resources. Definitely the Digital Health CRC has a list of great resources, the Australasian Telehealth Society as well, ACRM. There's a few of them that have actually got lists of links and resources to places where some of those comparisons have been made. But I just take all of that with a grain of salt, depending on who the author is. So if it's a particular brand, and they're trying to, make sure that they sort of end up getting the top marks. So I think just try and stick to some independent analyses if you can find them. But certainly that area is constantly changing. So it's, even if you looked at it a few months ago, it's worth going back and having a look again. The Healthdirect video call is Australian based. It's been built here. There was another platform that was used by Healthdirect prior to the current one that they had, and that one was also Australian based. I think it was Anywhere Healthcare. And there are some ones that have been integrated into existing systems, whether it's your patient management system or whether it's your booking engine. They've got some online video platforms that are Australian made. I think all of the Zooms, Skypes, etc. are all going to be Google Meets. All of those are predominantly based overseas, and I think it's important to understand where the data is hosted when you're doing consultations with some of those overseas based products. And there are some overseas based health specific products. So Zoom does have a Zoom for healthcare option, but it's very expensive. And there are some other American products like DoxyMe, and there's a couple of others based in other countries. But I think sticking to sort of a government endorsed one, if you're unsure, you don't want to do a lot of investigation yourself, is a first step, and you kind of know it's already met all of those compliance and standards that are likely to come in play at some point in the future. So unfortunately, a lot of the work does land on the practice managers, and I think we do require a lot of them to understand the workflows from the GP's perspective and trying to make sure that it's all running seamlessly. I think for the GP, the best scenario for you is that it's all been set up and you're just told this is what you need to do and you do it. You're not sitting there fiddling around with what platform to use. But I think it's really a whole of practice decision, and having some regular meetings as a whole group and saying what works for you, what is the extra admin burdens that we might be putting on someone else if we're doing things via telehealth, what do the front reception staff think, and what kind of calls are they fielding from people at home going, I'm here on the video call and I'm waiting, there's changes for everyone. So I think it's important that it's a whole of practice thing, that it's not just practice manager in isolation or the GP in isolation. Yeah, look, I think once you've done something once, being able to switch back is a lot easier than having to try and invent it the first time around. So certainly as we've started to transition out of doing mostly telehealth, where we're mostly now back face to face, being able to switch back to mostly telehealth again won't be as hard because our system's already there, our patients are already used to telehealth, and a big part was the change management process for the doctors and the practice staff as well as our patients, and they've already gone through that once. So I think it'll be a lot easier second time round.